Welcome to the final class of ALS414. Today we'll do the prototype presentations. I'm really excited to see what you all came up with. And then depending on how much time we have, this is a larger class than we've had in past years. So I don't know if we'll have that much time left, but I would like to get into a little bit of server-side code just to get you all excited, and then also maybe give you all some resources if you're interested in continuing your journey as a developer. But before we start the presentations, I'll just go over what the expectations are one more time, and happy to answer any questions as well. So the code itself, what I'm looking for are really, in terms of content, would a new user understand the purpose of the prototype without guidance? Of course, your user testing plays into that a little bit as well. Design, do you follow some of the design principles that we went over? And then does the prototype take inputs from the user, transform them into outputs that satisfy the core user story? This is the big one. This is really the bulk of the grade, is that were you able to not only create a site, but also make something functional with the code that addresses the user story itself. Data visualizations, charts, tables, graphics, colors, anything of the sort. And then also commenting. So this is something that you don't necessarily need to have done now, but by Thursday, I want to make sure that the code is well commented, so that it's something that basically if someone new were to come in, they'd understand what you were trying to do. Okay. Any questions about the code? So basically, you'll have until Thursday to clean anything up that you might need to clean up. But then, of course, what you're showing product-wise really needs to be finalized today for your presentations. So getting into the presentations, let's aim for about 20 minutes presentation, and then in addition, maybe a little bit of Q&A. So the user story, what I'm looking for is definitely describe what your user story is during the presentation, and then explain how your prototype is going to satisfy the user's needs. So this is, again, something I want to hammer in, is always have a user story from the onset. You can, of course, change it as you learn more from the user, but have that user story and make sure that your product, prototype, whatever you want to call it, addresses that user story. Roles, talk a little bit about what each member did, and then the methodology, how you met with each other and all of that. And then the user testing. So talk a little bit about how you used the user testing to make your project better. And all of that is in addition to just showing off your website itself. So definitely try to hit all of the functions and design principles that you're proud of. Okay. Any questions about the presentations or what we're doing with this project? Great. So I'll hand it off to you all. I will stop sharing my screen. First up will be surgery VR, followed by Reddit for medical imaging. And feel free to share your screen whenever you're ready.
Alrighty, can everyone hear me?
I can hear, but there's an echo.
Okay. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Alrighty, cool. So let me just present this. Alrighty, and Tyler can go ahead and get us started.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us for our presentation. Our website or our program is called Road to Recovery. And in our team was Alexa, myself, Tyler, and Sophia.
Alrighty, so for the team roles, we sort of had a mixed match of what we contributed to as far as the code goes. But as specific as possible, what I did was the JavaScript VR simulation game and its corresponding HTML and CSS code. And in general, I did review the HTML and CSS code as like a quality assurance type role.
Yeah, and for myself, I did a lot of the initial CSS styling and some HTML of the nav bar. And I also headed the user testing of our site features.
So I did mainly the HTML for the website and the banner and chat box CSS, as well as the login and sign-in features in Java, and also working with Tyler and Alexa and mixing and matching.
So for the progression of this, it was sort of Tyler and Sophia working first on the CSS and HTML for styling the pages. And then we moved into some like more formatting, just sort of making things more consistent across the sites, and then sort of incorporating the extra features to make the site interactive. Oops, sorry. Let me go back.
There you go. Cool.
All right, so we have the user stories. Go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah. So we had 3 main user stories going into the creation of our website. The first one, all of them being from the patient's point of view, because they'll be participating in a pre and post surgery recovery VR. The first one being, I want to be aware of what happens after a procedure to set expectations and be comforted. The second one being, I want to get more questions answered that weren't covered by the simulation. And the third one, I want to be able to navigate the app properly. And so going into user testing, here are some comments that we've got when users used our website. So things like password suggestions and confirmation, form and subform breakdowns. It was kind of hard to understand how everything links together. The provider search needs a little bit of work, and the titles could be more forward for each page. And these are all things that we incorporated into future versions of our website, and you'll be seeing that in the next upcoming slides, as well as for the website demo. I'll be kind of giving some blurbs about what we improved on and what we used in our final version for this presentation.
So for our user story, when the patient says, I want to be aware of what happens after a procedure to set expectation and be comfortable, our functions would be to have videos and simulations respective of the patient's condition, and have their choose their own story. And so before, we started off with a simulation with only 4 options and only 1 gameplay option, and they were unclear about where to go after that. And now that we have our final design, we have more information, and we have more instructions, more gameplay options, and also a better setting of expectations. And then for a user story, the patient says, I want to get more questions answered that weren't covered by the simulation. Our function would be to have a place to input questions and for others to respond. Before, we had a simple chat feature, but did not have any post input, so people wouldn't be able to put any messages in there. However, now we are still keeping the simple version, but now it's able to accept inputs and post-its. And then for our next feature, patient says, I want to be able to navigate the app properly. Our functions would be to make the page aesthetically pleasing and easy to understand. Before, we started off with just the nav bar. None of the buttons were linked. There was no options to sign out, and people signing in can't access any of our other features. But now we have more options. Everything is linked. And once somebody signs in, they're able to access the community page as well as the recovery VR. And then we'll have Alexa show the demo of our website.
Are you guys still able to see the screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So the first thing is just the homepage. Actually, this image here regenerates, so every time I load it, it will have a different image. But this is just sort of like everyone's road to recovery will be different, so it's sort of like a new fun page every time.
Oh, cool.
And so the options that are available are, you can search for some physicians, you could look into the community tab, and then if you want to access these features, you have to sign in first. Before you sign in, you can look at the About Us page, and that's just standard, our team. And then Finding Physicians is also open. I didn't want to block that off for people trying to seek medical attention. And so one of the previous comments made by this was about, I think it was like forums and sub-forums.
Yeah,
So I think that was sort of a lack of understanding of the goals of this site.
Mm-hmm.
But the closest we get to that is sort of having a location selection option and then having these fields that you can actually click on.
Mm-hmm.
And then
And,
it'll generate a page with the actual map for that hospital.
I can
And
kind
then
of
it'll let
comment
you
on
know
this.
what hospital you're at.
I can kind of comment on this in regard to the user testing. Previous versions of the finding physicians feature didn't really have a map. You were required to sign in. However, the sign in didn't really lead to anything. So the users were generally confused about what we were doing with the finding physician. So we linked that to not be dependent on a sign in. Like Alexa said, we didn't want to limit anybody who's looking for treatment right there. So we did kind of include the subforms for that by including 3 hospitals, as well as tracking your current location and the time to travel to those locations.
It does take a little bit of time to populate the page, so we probably need to work that out. But after that, they can just go back to home. And then to access things like the community page that's closed up right now, they actually do have to sign in to access this feature. And so if you click either the sign in page or sign in here, it should allow you to insert the fields to give you access to everything. So I'll just go ahead and type this in real quick. And so it lets you know that your login successful. You click the OK. And so it actually sends you to a different index. So this is the index, it's open. And so it shows that the community page is open, the VR page is open, and then instead of sign in now, you have sign out. So from here, you can click on like community, and it should be open to the chat box.
For the initial chat box, it didn't really have that picture. It didn't have any option to populate the chat box. So we added that feature in. There you go. Yeah, and it just populates just like that. And as well as referring to the nav bar after you sign in, we didn't have a sign out option. So there was really no distinction whether you were signed in or not. But having access to new features after you sign in makes it easier for the user to understand where they're at in the page, and kind of just makes it easier for them overall.
Yeah, and so we still need to work on the formatting for that, but the idea is there, so we'll get that fixed up. And then the next feature is the recovery VR page that gives you a background to gastric bypass surgery, has a video, and it also has some sites that you can go to just give you more background on these. My internet's a bit slow, sorry. But yeah, so just different pages that sort of give you a lot of information, and then just have a few of these on the site so that you don't have to be searching everywhere on Google. But then the next part is actually the game. And Sophia can cover more on that.
To start off the simulation, you wake up after your gastric bypass surgery and you're on your way home. You see a drive-through Burger King on the way. What do? Stop by Burger King or go straight home? No, I'm gonna go stop by Burger King. You decide to stop by Burger King and you take a look at the menu. Do you buy a burger, buy a milkshake, buy a burger, milkshake, and fries? You know, I'm feeling a little hungry, so I'm gonna go with the last option, buy a burger, milkshake, and fries, please. And then after leaving Burger King, you head home. And your only option is to eat it. So after eating it, you overfill your stomach and get constipated due to the surgery. You're stuck on the toilet all night. Remember not to eat heavy solid foods for the couple of months. And then you can restart the simulation. I guess that was a bad choice. So maybe next time I'm going to go straight home. And you decide to drive home and rest. After 2 months, you go to your appointment. Your recovery is going well. And then when you decide to head back home, you're on your way home again, and you see a drive-through Burger King again. You decide to stop by now to celebrate your recovery process. So maybe, you know, we won't eat that heavy now. Let's try a milkshake. You drink the milkshake and you feel fine. You continue to recover just fine with daily walks and drinking enough water. Wow, that is great. And then you can restart.
Yeah, and so there's a few different variations, and the goal is just that if you have certain habits, sometimes the doctor will tell you one thing, you won't always subscribe to that directly. So it's more of what can we do to just educate you about what will happen and what are the next steps after? Obviously, there's pain medications, there's times where you'll need to see a physician. So it's just about managing the expectations of your decisions after surgery. And even if we go to like other options, like let's say I want to eat everything, but then I decide to go for a short walk. Short walks are actually also recommended for this surgery, and as well as staying hydrated. So it's sort of just um, how are you going to be feeling afterwards? And after you are done with just navigating around the page, and then you click, let's say you click sign out, then everything will be closed again and you'll have to sign in to access it. And then if you don't have an account, the last thing will be to sign up and make an account. And then it's just a typical, you enter the fields here, and then you're able to select from a few conditions. This will help to personalize your experience. And so I'll just put, I will not put my full name, but a random one. And this isn't working yet, but the goal is that once you make your profile and save it, it will load up the homepage again, but this time you actually have access to everything that you had before. So I think that's everything for our site.
Thank you for watching our presentation on Road to Recovery, where every journey is different. Let's go.
Great. Thanks so much. I think you all did a great job, and it's clearly a fully fleshed out website. It's very clear what you're trying to do. And I think you accomplished a lot of that. What would you all say was maybe your most frustrating part of building this site? And then maybe on the other side, the most satisfying thing, where did anything just click and you're like, oh yes, this is such a great way to do it?
Okay, so this is actually Alexa speaking because I'm with Sophia, but for me, the most frustrating is figuring out the formatting, because sometimes we would make like different containers, and then I'm like, wait, can't we just use the same container? And then I have to go back and find everything. So I think we scrambled a little bit at the beginning with clearly defining everything, and so we had to go back and sort of fix it. But what was really satisfying is when we finally got everything like centered and everything in like nice boxes and it's like pretty colors. That was probably my favorite part.
Great. Yeah. And honestly, the formatting, particularly positioning, is something that to this day I don't like to do. I think some people they find their niche within that, but certainly not mine. And it's you sort of wish sometimes, why can't this just be as easy as a PowerPoint, right? Why do they have to make it so hard to position something? I think part of that is because you have to accommodate different screen sizes, right? But it's just something that it brings no end to the frustration in terms of positioning. I think you all did a great job though, and the formatting looks very nice throughout, very consistent. Just a few things here or there where maybe something wasn't centered, but overall, I think it really looks nice. Does anyone else in the class have any questions or comments? Okay, great job. I will say the PowerPoint at the beginning was beautiful, but I don't want that to worry any of the other teams. If you don't have something like that, it's certainly not necessary. It is a good way to sort of provide the perspective that I might need to get into the demo. So try to make sure that you're providing that, right, in terms of what are the user stories and all of that, but doesn't need to be a fancy PowerPoint, nothing like that. So don't worry, don't scramble right now if you don't have that. It's certainly not essential for your presentation. All right, great work. Up next is Reddit for medical imaging.
So I'll start off with saying we are definitely that group that did not make a PowerPoint.
Not a problem. Honestly, if it were me, I probably would not have made one either. So
yeah,
not a problem at all, as long as you explain those concepts.
Sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So first, we'll just go to our site. This is Med Images, is what we're calling it. So starting off, when we were doing our wireframe, or when I was doing the wireframe, the user story was this site that was locked to only physicians. And our first end user testing was with a physician. And the question was asked, what would you use the website for? And his feedback was that he would use it as basically a place to engage in dialogue, just general dialogue with his peers. And so that's what we wrapped the website around in terms of medical images. So I worked on this with Pablo and Chris. Pablo, for a majority of it, did most of the HTML and CSS right off the bat, did the HTML and CSS for the nav bar, came up with basically the formatting of the website and how the user would look at the website starting off and how they would kind of navigate it throughout. And then Chris went in with the JavaScript and implemented the features such as our like and dislike buttons and our initial comment kind of section here using the Facebook API for commenting. And then I did a lot of the end user testing, quality assurance, and then polishing and troubleshooting of the website. And so what I want to start off with is basically we'll just go through navigating the website. So as a kind of a new user just coming across the website, this is what you're going to see. It's our homepage. At the top, you're going to see our nav bar, our home button, a non-functional search bar, so it doesn't work. But we'll talk about how we can make this work later. We ended up having a lot of changes to the structure of our code in general that ends up actually making the site itself way sleeker, and we'll go into that here in a second. But when you scroll down, you're going to see different posts, just stock photos with a blurring functionality that I came up with, which basically just blurs all the images, gives you a warning saying that, hey, these are graphic images. Click to proceed if you want to see these graphic images. Basically a warning for any layperson that might not be a physician that comes across this website, which are end users after interviewing the physician, just general end users who wanted to come across the website mentioned that they would like to have as a function. Because you don't want to just come across a page and be exposed to maybe graphic images that you're not consenting to see really. So you would click to proceed, and then the image would unblur. You'd be able to see the image. You'd be able to see any comments, the likes and dislikes on the posts, and this is pretty static throughout each and every post. Each and every post has this functionality, and really, I think there's more to talk about the code after this that we can talk about in a bit. But going through the nav bar, right, the home button will refresh your home page, basically set everything back to static, blurring all the images, showing your like and dislikes and your comments. And then we have a login page for health providers to log in with their registered accounts. Pretty standard stuff, a username, a password, and a login button, and if they wanted to be remembered, And then if they don't have an account, a sign up page, which we initially actually had as a separate button here, but through end user testing, across the board, everyone kind of agreed upon having this being part of the login page. A majority of people kind of had this bias that many websites do this, where the sign up area is kind of embedded into the login page. So for signing up, we're asking for the email address, a password, confirmation of the password, and then your NPI, your National Provider Identification Number. Through end user testing, people who weren't physicians had no idea what this was, which, for our purpose, an explanation wasn't really needed, because for end users testers who were physicians, we also did end user testing with a PA and knew exactly what the NPI was and why it was there for, and kind of got the idea that this was kind of gated behind physicians only. And then, our general sign up buttons, a cancel button, and a remember me. And then we have our about us page, which was a kind of last minute addition through kind of our final end user testing, where a lot of people didn't know what the mission was for the website. And this was generally for those who weren't physicians, who didn't understand that this was supposed to be gated behind physicians. And so we have a little blurb here about it being a semi-exclusive forum for medical professionals to share medical images and engage in dialogue with their peers. And then we just kind of have some templates here. Basically, for what our end users told us was when we had our initial contact page for the website, they didn't know who they were contacting, who was moderating the website, and who they would be getting in touch with. And so we wanted to have an about us page and areas where you could potentially contact specific people who are moderating the website, who is the founder of the website, and other people involved in the website. And so these contact us buttons each all will forward the user to our contact page, which will give general inputs, their first name, their last name, their country of origin, and then what they're writing us about. And that's really what the skeleton of our project is here. And what I'd like to do is go over to CodePen. This is what I used for troubleshooting and debugging. This is a website where basically you put in your HTML, your CSS, and JavaScript all in one area, and it will adaptively update as you're coding, which became paramount in formatting the website and getting our centering and everything down. So this was kind of what V1 was for Reddit for medical imaging or med images. Super heavy on the left side, which across the board, all of our end users absolutely hated, and verbatim in our end user testing, people did say, yeah, I completely hate this. People felt that maybe it was their browser, it was on their end, they needed to refresh the page. It wasn't, something was wrong. And so we really needed to figure out kind of priority number one was figuring out this formatting, getting everything centered to make it look a bit easier on the eyes and make sure that our end users didn't think that something was wrong with the website.
Yeah, I can chime in a little bit on this part. So a bit of the issue when like formatting the CSS and the HTML was trying to get it centered. Sometimes just moving either the image or the title would just disrupt the sequence of whatever followed. We would be able to center the title and the image, but the buttons were just so stubborn they wouldn't move. Or if we got them to move, the functionality of the button, some reason, just disappeared. So now we would have buttons that weren't doing anything in the center. And then we were having issues where we were trying to link a certain CSS page to an HTML, and then the colors wouldn't transfer over. So we had different pages with different colors. The pages weren't linking properly because we had originally the way we set up the repository, we had the CSS files in a specific folder with an HTML. And because of that, how we were trying to pull them, it was kind of confusing the repository. So it was causing an issue in linking the pages. So like Akin was saying, we were able to troubleshoot a lot of it using CodePen, where we were able to actually see the mistakes and then truly format everything. And then Chris came in with the JavaScript and added even more functionality to the buttons and the comments. So ideally, like he was saying, we kind of want it to be an interactive thread where you could see past posts of like physicians and kind of like what they're discussing and see if it can be relevant to like a physician that's currently looking for an issue. Yeah.
So you can see even the JavaScript that Chris has put in, it is working, right? In V1, everything was working. It's really a formatting thing, but what we really realized as a group was that our initial layout of our code, our 498 lines of code, was all static. Each and every post was uniquely coded into the website. And what we ended up doing and what ended up kind of culminating from Chris's contribution here, especially through these buttons, is he implemented Vue.js to make these buttons dynamically update. And we looked at the code and we realized that we could make each and every post dynamically update through Vue.js. And so what we'll go to is V2 of the website and the code, and you'll see we only have 104 lines of our HTML code now. We were able to basically make every post into an object in our object array and call upon each and every post uniquely into our website. And so we'll go up and we have basically our first, what we're calling for our post, right? So we have button functionality through Vue.js, but we're also calling upon each post image link from our array uniquely through a loop. Where is it? V4 loop, which will basically kind of go down the line of our array and call upon each and every post basically as a package, keeping all of the elements that we have in all of our likes and dislikes and the comment section for each and every post to uniquely be called upon. And what this does is it allows us to call upon a post that might uniquely also have a certain number of likes and dislikes. So we'll go into our array and we'll update one of the posts to have 15 likes and 3 dislikes. When we scroll down, we'll see that one of our posts ends up having 15 likes and 3 dislikes. And this basically allows for the future of the website and for scalability purposes for a forum for any physician to come in and make a post. Basically a way for us to be able to set up a user input area where they would basically just be inputting this information. Obviously a bit prettied up, where they wouldn't be coding line for line of the image link or title that they want, right? But eventually we'd have a database linked up to this post array where users would be inputting their objects, and we'd be able to call upon those custom objects or posts into the website. I think that's might be all I got.
I think by doing that, it just it cleaned up the HTML significantly, because before it was kind of horrific to to look at and to find the mistake with so many lines. But I think it wasn't until the end of the project that we figured out a more efficient way to do it. So that's why we were able to clean it up so efficiently.
Yeah, I just want to chime in. A lot of it was really hard to find like a really good JavaScript framework, and just kind of sorting out all the different, what the difference between all the different types were. But Vue, I think, was the best one that I found. But the thing with that was that a lot of the Vue framework, they use single file. Everything is like one file. It's not broken up into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So it's hard to find good examples that could do like more advanced functionality. So that's why it's kind of, the buttons are more simple. But I think in the future, I would like to have like I don't know if we would need some kind of like cloud functionality connection to like actually record, the unique likes, instead of having it just refresh when the page refreshes. I think that was kind of the biggest challenge, was making those unique to each visitor. Yeah, and then also making the unique comment boxes, where I think Facebook would make you like have a new API key for each post. So that's why all the comments are the same. But yeah, so those were some of the challenges that I personally faced. But yeah, no, it was definitely interesting learning how to use Vue.
Okay, great. So I think you all did a great job. I think to address those last 2 comments, I think probably use of cookies might have helped remember the amount of likes associated with an image. With that, it's sort of it's a fair problem to have, because the real solution would be to have a real database, but that's just not something that we had enough time to teach in this course. I think cookies might have been the way in tying it to some sort of unique ID associated with each image, so that it can remember the likes and dislikes and then feed that back into the array. And then the Facebook thing, that's a tough one, right? And that's sort of one of the classic problems that you have when you try to use someone else's API, is they might put limitations in, because maybe Facebook only intends their comments to be used for a single blog post or something like that. And so if you use it outside of the way that they intend, you're sort of at their mercy. And that's something that a lot of legitimate funded startups will run into, where they can sometimes be over dependent on a third-party provider, and a Facebook, which they have done pretty much every year without fail, change their terms or change certain aspects of their APIs, then you're at their mercy and you have to suddenly scramble to try to fix it, right? So that's maybe something where the Facebook system is the initial MVP version, and then the next version would be creating your own commenting feature, something like that.
Yeah, that
go
was a
ahead.
point of kind of confusion there with end users, and it was just a quick explanation that this was kind of the MVP functionality for comments, right? Because they saw Facebook and they thought, oh, well, we thought there's an account linked to the website, but
Sure.
after some explanation, it kind of worked that out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it all depends on how important a given feature is to your user story, right? There's some things that you're okay doing a little bit of just using the Facebook version for now because this isn't quite as important. But then the things that are very important, you make sure that you get those completely right. What would you all say was sort of to mirror the last question, the most frustrating part of this, and then maybe also were there any aha moments where you felt like, great, you figured out how to use code to make this website that much better?
For me, I think one of the most frustrating moments was I forgot what I was trying to do at the beginning, but I spent like 5 or 6 hours and had like absolute no work to show for it. And then I came across, I don't know if it was Stackflow or some website that just like made me realize that I was missing something small in the code, and then I typed it in and then everything worked, and I had wished that I had found that 5 or 6 hours earlier.
Yeah, I think for me, integrating the JavaScript with the, I guess, the HTML class to actually, because I had the button, like the button was clicking, but it wasn't formatted, and then the formatted button wasn't clicking. So I think merging like the HTML formatting with a function was like the click point for me.
Yeah, and then I think the biggest challenge for me was I basically worked on the blurring functionality, and getting that thing to work was like kind of like Pablo, where I spent like 5-6 hours on it and I didn't get anywhere for a day or two, and then finally I kind of got through it, and that's where I came across CodePen and kind of dynamically trying to edit code. The big aha moment for me was when Chris added in the Vue.js, and I looked into it and I realized that we could kind of make our posts dynamic, and it basically ended up shortening our entire code by like 400 lines. So
sure. Great. And I did like this story that you all have told with a couple of the features of how you ran into trouble and then used certain tools, whether that be the CodePen or using that JavaScript functionality to reduce the HTML hard coding, to use that to make the code more efficient. And that's sort of behind the scenes stuff. So good stuff to talk about in the presentation. And I'll also just comment to everyone, this spending 5 hours and then realizing that it was like one line that was messed up happens to everyone, no matter how good of a developer they are. No one writes the final product on their first try. And I think one thing, if any of you are considering going into development, this is not the end all be all, but one thing to think about is, did the satisfaction of solving that after 5 hours make up for the frustration of spending those 5 hours? And if the answer is no, then that's not going to go away. So just something to think about. But if the answer is yes, then I think you have a good foundation to try to build on the skills that you've learned in this class. Any other questions from the class? All right, thanks so much. Moving right along, let's go to period tracker.
I'm going to share my screen. Thanks, Leilani. And Leilani is going to take it away.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, here you go. Okay, so this is the PCOS food network. It was the period tracker before, but we changed it more to PCOS Food Network, which would be explained later on the user testing. Oh yeah, Mary. Okay, so this is our team. So Julie was our Scrum Master as well. She developed our user testing questions and also facilitated our first round of user testing as well as our second. And then Asan also did QA user testing. I was doing more of the backend code, and Mary did most of the front end coding for the project. So this is what we have planned for our presentation. Next slide, please. And just an overview what our project motivation is. PCOS is something that like it says here, 6 to 12% of women have it. It's when you have irregular periods and you get weight gain, you like have weight gain, and basically why we picked this is like one of our main ideas was to deal with food. So like what kind of food is good to eat while you have PCOS. And so that's why we were leaning towards that and went away from the period tracker. So we just focus more on like food and diet, like dieting. And then Julie will go with her first user story.
Yeah, thank you, Leilani. So for our first user story, as a person with PCOS, I would like to share my experiences and connect with other PCOS patients so that I could be part of a community that understands what it is like to live with the disease. In general, being able to talk about diseases or conditions is very difficult. So the purpose of our website was to sort of create a platform to sort of enable people to have these conversations and to be able to relate to navigating PCOS and just being able to connect with each other and post about experiences and message directly and indirectly through the use of our message board, which we will see in greater detail later on in the presentation. Next slide. So our second user story is, as a person with PCOS, I would like to have a platform to find recipes and foods that work with PCOS so that I can have a variety of recipes and meals that work around my new food tolerances and symptoms. One of the main things with PCOS is that people with this disease are able to sort of lessen their symptoms through the use or through being able to have a well-balanced diet with very specific ingredients and such. So having a website where a person can just get these recipe ideas and identify these PCOS friendly foods and learn about how to build an understanding of the foods and recipes that are PCOS friendly, we'll be able to do so through the use of some of our featured videos and through a very cool recipe generator that Leilani has been able to get working. Next slide, please. And our last user story is, as a newly diagnosed and young adult with PCOS, I want to learn about what other patient stories that can help me adapt with the condition, but also develop a new life skill. So with this, we were able to include video resources on the relationships between PCOS and food intake.
Mary, I think you're muted.
For phase one of our development, we wanted to we focused on what type of website we wanted to do, either a traditional one or one specific to a mobile friendly website. We decided to go with more of a traditional one and merging the two ideas. Also in phase one, we were more focused with the overall aesthetics and initial features that some of which didn't work. We focused on just first getting up one backend feature up and running and just demonstrating the aesthetics of the other features and tackling the features one at a time. We also faced a little bit of a disagreements in which direction to choose when making our features dynamic. So we had a preliminary user testing we wanted to see what the users thought, if they wanted to log in and be directed into the recipe generator or directed back into the home page. And we also wanted feedback on the sign up itself, whether or not we should combine the sign up or the sign in, or have two pathways to get to the same place. We also asked for their overall opinions on our site and the aesthetics. And we ended up we were able to show what we might look like if we formatted the main part of the website versus leaving it plain white. Then the users indicated that they wanted a more clear way of logging in and signing in. They wanted to be directed to the homepage itself and having the option of navigating all of our different features. And the overall aesthetic was this led into our first round of QA, where we noticed that our message board was duplicating the responses on the bottom and the top. And for some reason, our generator was kicking it all the way to the bottom. So we addressed that as we moved into phase 2 of our development. Phase 2 of our development, we focused more on fixing the diet message board, and we left some of the other features to get more feedback in the final user testing, which Julie will talk about the design.
Thank you, Mary. So for the final user testing, we really wanted to emphasize some of the top 5 features within our website. One of the main things that we wanted to test is the login, whether or not someone could access this, the aesthetics, and whether or not they were pleasing to the user. We also wanted to be able to test the tabs on the website and make sure that people were able to access the message board and the recipe generator and such. Additionally, we also wanted to get feedback on the recipe generator. We were finally able to make it work, and we had a couple people use it. However, the first couple of runs were a little bit difficult in terms of the aesthetics, so we were able to later fix that. And then additionally, the videos, we wanted to make sure that people were able to play them and be able to hear the audio and such. And lastly, we also wanted to test on the blog message board and make sure that people were able to sort of access this. In terms of the testing method, we decided to go with a concurrent think aloud, where our users would sort of be able to give us their organic and natural responses to just going through this website for the very first time and giving us their feedback as it comes with little to no guidance. Additionally, through our user testing, we were able to gather 5 users, one of which was a PCOS patient, and they were all very helpful in helping us sort of figure out where to go with the website next. Next slide. So as far as the login goes, users knew what it was for. It was very clear. Click login and you would go to a pop-up. Additionally, it was very easy to navigate. That was basically all the feedback that we got from users. However, some users were saying that they got an error saying that the credentials were incorrect, but it was able to log them in anyways. One user said that the graphics were a little bit clunky or cheap. And many said that the pop-out box was a little bit too big prior to the finalization of our website. We were able to, prior to that, the pop-up would have feature sort of a giant icon of a girl's face, and then users would have to scroll to the bottom to sort of log in. Additionally, that was probably one of the biggest feedbacks that we got on our user testing runs. Next slide. With the tabs, all testers were able to sort of tell us what the purpose of that was. They were very easy to find and navigate according to our user tests. However, at the time of the testing, the About Us page did not have information. Some users did let us know that they would probably want to know a little bit more about, who made the website and such. And the contact form was able to auto-generate. We had one user who really liked this function. However, when you submit information through the contact form, you would get a 404 error. Additionally, the accessibility button didn't seem to work. Users would click on it and nothing would happen. And then additionally, one of the key features was being able to go back to the homepage was relatively easy. And the sign up was skewed to the bottom of the page and was a little bit cut off at first. And another user said that these tabs were organized in a very easy to read and nice fashion. Next slide.
So I'll be continuing on our findings for our final user testing. So in terms of our recipe finder, we had a little bit of confusion from some users as to what the initial purpose was, what the initial purpose was for, and some feedback on potentially including more preset ingredients. So these are foods that you're commonly seeing PCOS patients usually purchase and eat, and then having the idea for a drop-down menu just for the ease of convenience and preventing the user from sitting there at their computer a little bit in confusion or drawing a blank when it comes to foods because they might feel a little anxious and things like that. And then we also had some users that said that the feature didn't appear to work because the results were appearing at the bottom left corner of the page that had to be scrolled down to as well. So the page is rather large. So in order to see those initial results, they were showing up at the bottom. And some of them actually thought it was not working at all because they didn't see the scroll bar. And so they weren't able to go see those results. And we also got some feedback about them wanting to see more than just 3 results. So we usually get 3 results every time we do a search. So they were hoping, maybe something closer to 5 to 10, just to have some variety in the ideas. And we also got feedback on having a beginning section. So it's already like some pre-provided recipes that are, common go-tos, but then similar to like how Chegg or a news article company might do, is that they will show a description or they'll show like, the introduction to the article, or for Chegg, they'll show a little bit of the answers and then it blurs out the rest. So it kind of incentivizes you to then proceed with signing up for the website to then get access to the recipe generator. And then just the ability to, find the recipes and sign up should be, I think, combined. And so when we get into our video feedback in the next slide, we had no issues with uploading the YouTube videos into the website and embedding them and everything like that. So that was really, really great. And it was pretty straightforward in terms of what the purpose was for, because the titles were displayed. So that was very helpful, and it was straight to the point, and all of our users were able to grasp what the videos were trying to explain. So it definitely served its purpose, but maybe they thought we might have too many videos just because the videos are long and they don't want to spend their entire time stuck on a home page, things like that. And so another issue we had was that the video was the initial video thumbnails were a little bit small. So, not being able to see the image of the person talking, that might be an issue with engagement. And so we might lose a few hits through that. And also there was a little bit of a weird indented structure to where we had the title and then indented was the video and then indented was the next title after that. So it kind of looked like a staircase descending. So what we went ahead to do was try to line them up centrally. And then also just having a description to accompany the videos to say, this video is more about the disease overview and this video is more about diet planning. Would definitely help just in case someone doesn't want to watch a video about the disease overview and they want to get straight to the food stuff. And next we talked about, or we got some feedback about the blog. And so some users like the appearance of it just because it's stacking in chronological order and from oldest down to newest, and it was pretty. We had some feedback that the purpose was pretty clear, but then others were a little bit unsure about whether or not it's supposed to be a little bit more of like a personal experience type of sharing setup, or if it's more casual just for food and for everyday talk. So I think maybe refining that purpose is something that definitely needs to be worked on and then made more accurate. And some of our users didn't like that you actually have to sign up for the website to be able to access this, which might take away a little bit away from anonymity, and so just protecting your personal information. So some users would like to have a preference of being able to access those comments anonymously, and if they want to share their own experience, then they would have the option to make an account. And so we got some feedback about that, and maybe making that an option would be very useful. But getting into the additional comments in the next slide, we got some additional overall comments from our users, and so their key takeaways basically. So one of our users was getting the idea that this website is trying to encourage people with PCOS and get them to look more into diet plans, but they still thought it was a little bit all over the place and not too refined when it comes to what the main takeaway and the main purpose that the website was serving. And they wanted to see a little bit more specificity when it comes to descriptions and labeling and things like that. And we had another user that said if they had PCOS, so this was a non-PCOS user, they felt a little bit confused on how to navigate the website when they were doing their user testing. They liked the homepage, but they wanted a little bit more context, a little bit more, straight to the point type of labeling, things like that. So we definitely tried to work on that. And lastly, they also wanted, a little bit more of a friendlier, more pleasant type of experience, just because patients that are undergoing PCOS are already going through quite a lot. So if we're able to, have a user experience that is, nice and fun and not complicated and not stress inducing, it would definitely just help them because they're already going through quite a large adjustment. If they're a new patient, they're going through quite a lot if they are a patient that has had PCOS for a while. And now we'll talk about the quality assurance, the final phase in the next slide. So we did a final user test where we kind of picked apart the functionality and then the aesthetics just from our own team's perspective. So we like that the YouTube links both worked, and there's a GIF at the bottom that it was just nice and pleasant to look at, and it doesn't freeze up or anything like that. So that shows that everything's running the right way. And for our sign up and sign in page, so it's been combined, and it'll take you to a login button. The issue here is that sometimes when people click sign up and sign in, they expect a sign in type of section and then a sign up type of section where you create your account. So that was combined, so that might cause a little confusion if someone's saying I can't log in, I need to make an account first, where do I go? So they might not know to click the login button initially. And then also just centering the button because it was attached to the side, just to make it a little bit more easy to see and doesn't look like it's blended into the sidebar. And when you're not logged in, we saw that the recipe finder, like we have an informational page, and so it kind of walks you through how it works. And so that was, all the images were visible and the tutorial is easy to see. And when you're not logged in, you can see a sample of the message board, and the text and everything like that is readable. So just being able to see that is important for people who want to test out the website. And once you are logged in, you go straight to the home page, but we thought that maybe having, similar to other websites, your own account name up in the corner showing that you are logged in, just so it doesn't cause any confusion or frustration, could definitely be helpful. And also, the recipe finder was working well for us, but there was only 3 links. So we thought, potentially to include a little bit more, just to have that variety of options and suggestions. And the message board works to submit our own foods, but we have like a comment section that's linked to your Facebook, and we have a filter that helps you filter from oldest to newest posts. But it looked like it might have been for your food submission part. So clarifying that just by positioning it more strategically is something that we want to improve going forward. And the contact us portion, the form doesn't work at the very end when you try to submit it. And as for the aesthetics and the convenience, we're looking to maybe go with a nicer font, just something a little less archaic and something more pleasant to look at, just because, again, trying to keep in mind the user experience. And regarding the homepage, it's good in that we centered it. It's easy to see the link, but we want to see a link to the recipe generator just so we don't miss hits. If in case someone thinks that it's a informational website and not a recipe finder, if they don't look at the tabs, then we might miss out on users. And when we made our fixes, we like that everything is centered, but the entire, I think, block of text should be moved to the side just for the sake of spatial preferences and things like that. And Leilani will go over the final adjustments that we made.
So for our adjustments, we actually centered everything to the center, aligned it to the center, because like Hassan said, most of everything was towards the right. So I was able to adjust that. And then next slide, please. So here's the message board that it's on the left. I was able to get it into a box, and then when you submit, it posts the comment. And then on the right, we also have this button. The login was all the way in the left. I think that was mentioned before. I was able to set it as well. And we had the login. When you press the login, it gives you the username and password, but we also put the create account underneath it. So if the person doesn't have an account, they have the option to do that. Next slide. And for the recipes the recipe generator, I was able to get that to work as well. So we get three links in there with the recipes. When you add in any like food as well, like in the coding, you don't have to have the comma or the space. The code, it immediately just separates them and puts them into a list, and it goes into the API, and this is the results that we get. And then we put a little video just to show how it works, but this is how it looks, and I'll be I can go do this live just to show you to everyone. So Mary's also right next to me, so oh god. Okay, so this is our website. We were able to, like I said before, we were able to get it all aligned. So here, and we found like gifts in them, and then the videos should work as well. So people can take a look at that. Both of them work. And so when you go and sign in, you log in. We're gonna like make this smaller as one of the feedback, but we created a dummy account to log us back in. And then once we have the dummy account, we're able to access the generator, and it gives us all of the recipes that pop up in Google. As well, for the API, I was able to make it through Google, and I had settings where like I can put the keywords like PCOS, recipes, food, and then in addition, it would add the food that the person the person wants to use. And then we have the message board. It's still a little mess. We still have to like style it, but like I can just do that, submit, and then I go back. And then in this this is our about page where we added with our message statement, and then the team, and as well the contact us tab. And as well, when you log out, this is what you get. But I forgot to mention the other thing about this. If you're not logged in, you can also, this is what pops up just for like safety concerns. So we have like what the message board is about with a little picture of how it should look like, and as well as the recipe gives another example of how the function works. And so that is our final outcome on the website. So I think that's all.
Great, thanks so much. So I'll just ask the same question. Was there anything in particular that really hung you guys up, or you perceived as a snag? And then were there any aha moments through your development of the page?
The API was very difficult too.
That was the recipe generator?
Yeah, the recipe generator was very, I mean, Google has a way of like, you can like create your own URL and putting like all the settings and playing around with it, which is okay, but then embedding it into the website and trying to get the results to show up as links, as well as like just styling it, was very difficult. Very.
Any aha moments? Go ahead,
On
Mary.
the front end, one of the hardest thing about the front end, and it was after, because we went through like first, I did the front end with the CSS for formatting, just the initial, and then Leilani went after I got it done, and she can see, okay, this is a part of the code where the Java fits in. We just left a comment. I left a comment where it, so she would know exactly where to put in and implement the Java instead of and having it integrated right into the HTML instead of calling it like we call in the CSS file. We decided not to go through that avenue. It was easier for Leilani to do the back end. But because we didn't call it into the HTML, it offset everything. So, and you can see that when we talked about our preliminary and second user testing, a lot of it, the body of it was hidden underneath the navigation bar. And that's because it offset whatever it was. And from the front end, it was having to understand the logic of the backend code and how to integrate that into the front end was very challenging. And it took Leilani and I coming together as front and back end together side by side. And that's, I would say that's kind of where our aha moment came from, because we learned the importance of merging both the front end and back end together. And that collaborative effort resulted in a better final MVP for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do like there's a sort of coherence to the site in general. I'm curious, so you said that you did user testing with someone with PCOS. Did you all treat the feedback from that person any differently, or was it sort of all combined into a bucket of things to work on? And then a follow-up is, you had so much feedback in general that you all went over. Was there a way that you prioritized or decided to choose which ones to actually work on?
Hassan was responsible for finding the PCOS patient and was a friend of his. So will you talk about it, Hassan?
Yeah, I think going through it, I definitely was a little like more attentive into her experience. I mean, we were closely, facilitating all the patients, but for her particularly, I think, yeah, I valued her advice a little bit more, especially with the recipe generator. She seemed to like that quite a bit, and so I was just trying to be a little bit more attentive to that. But I'd say overall, I think a lot of her suggestions still lined up with the general advice the rest of the users were giving. But she did inform us. I think it was like satisfying to hear that the recipe generator was something that she had not come across throughout her journey with PCOS for a decade or so.
Yeah, I think that was a real success getting that generator work, even though you mentioned it as your biggest frustration. I think it really was a good thing to end up with, because it's sort of something that you could really do just by Googling and putting the PCOS in there. But so many people just don't know how to do these basic things. And by putting the constraint in yourself, it makes that process more intuitive for people. Any questions from the rest of the classmates or comments?
Did you want us to address your second half of your question, how we prioritize the feedback?
Sure, if you got something.
So initially what we did was we went with the majority on a lot of things. Like in terms of the aesthetics and like the sign up or sign in, we went with the majority. And we addressed some of the larger things. We didn't want a lot of bulk writing on our homepage. We felt that was added stress. So we really played around with narrowing in and being very specific with our headers, saying that it's specifically up front that this is a food network. We're only tackling and addressing how diet can impact PCOS. And that instead of having a description of it, we just clarified on our titles and taking the feedback about how to make it a little more friendly. That's where we put in the gifts in place. And then but we decided that this is a very personal issue that we're trying to support people with, and we felt that privacy was the better thing.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Great job. Next up is Insurance Finder.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Today, Alec Frias, Kevin Sang, and me, Maria Mello, we're going to talk about our website that is an insurance funder. So let me guide you through our website. So we have a home screen where you can see different states. So our plan is to show different maps with different locations of the insurances. So like if you see here, the zoom that we did is that you can see the whole state. And if we go to Nevada, you can see the map of Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, Colorado, Montana, etc. But we also start thinking about what happens if the user like doesn't want to see the map and just want to have like the name of the insurance and the contact information, the phone number, etc. So that's why when we created an insurance company's list, so you can see the company name, the phone number, and the website. And as we don't have like many information, and sometimes you need more than a name and the contact information, we added frequent asked questions about the website. So is there a mobile version that is basic questions? Can I create an account? What is the difference between a HMO and a PPO? What is a copay and what is the deductible? But also in terms of locations, for example, what if I don't see my state? So here, like for example, the answer is that we're still collecting data for other states, because at first when we did the prototype here in the home screen, what we wanted to do is just put an input bar with a zip code and it can be all over the US. But accommodating that and like filtering and using the loops for HTML, it was a little bit challenging. So we decided just to put certain states with their maps. And finally, we had a contact section when you like fill your name, your email address, phone number, and the question that you have. And for example, here we did put some verification in case that you don't fill out all the inputs that we have here. And that's basically our app. And now I will hand it off to Kevin that is going to talk about the user stories.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. So the inspiration behind our prototype and our website was thinking about our own personal experiences, like looking for insurance or moving to a new state, and also just what we heard from other people and their difficulties when they're trying to shop for insurance plans. So we came up with a couple of user stories that motivated the project. So one of them would be, as a person moving to a new state, I want to explore insurance plans in a specific location. And that's what kind of inspired the whole landing page with the big map and the different states. We also have another user story, which is, well, as a person with recently expired insurance, I am shopping for a new plan and want to see the other options available. And so that also motivated the table that we came up with, which shows them a broad database of different plans that they can look at to kind of shop around and get an idea of what other plans are out there. Even having the name and contact information and website alone would be a good jumping off point for them to go on the website specifically and then look for more information. But just seeing all that information collected together in a table format, we thought would be useful for someone who wants to shop around. And then finally, as a person who recently switched providers, I am shopping for plans that my new provider will accept. So in this situation, maybe a person is currently unsatisfied with the services rendered by their current healthcare physician, and they have a new doctor in mind, but the new doctor doesn't accept their current insurance. And because of that reason, they want to look for new insurance companies. So at this new doctor's office, they might have a list of insurance that the doctor accepts, but they don't know exactly how to go from there. So we thought that our website would be a good mediator for somebody in that stage to kind of look at these different insurance plans out there. So moving on to the next slide, Alec can talk a little bit more about the roles for our team.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. So in the beginning, we assigned these roles. So for Kevin, he was in charge of quality assurance and user testing. Maria was more in charge of like the coding with CSS and JavaScript. And then I was also doing some of the coding with HTML and the Scrum Master. But we kind of didn't really stick entirely to these roles. We did help each other out, you know, if any problems did arise with like say coding. So we were all very communicative within like our group chats and had meetings to discuss, you know, some issues that arose. So, you know, we all collectively work together, you know, to help build the website and, you know, develop user stories and everything. The next slide.
Yeah, and to kind of expand on that, so in terms of how we use agile methodology, we realized that the roles that we tried to assign ourselves in didn't, well, one, not all of us had coding experience. Maria has a lot of coding experience, but Alec and I were relatively new to it. And we still wanted to figure out how to best work together and not have any roadblocks during our coding process, because then it'd be very easy to just get super stuck behind on like a very early version of the prototype. And so we found that kind of this concept of like T-shaped people, so working outside of our roles and working together and kind of reaching across the categories. So even though Alec was in charge of HTML and I was in charge of user testing, during those phases when we felt like we could jump in and had some expertise, we did so. And for Maria, when she was putting the JavaScript together, I realized that an element of my coding portion needed JavaScript. So I just hopped on and did that as well. So it was a lot of working together outside of our initial roles. In fact, we kind of like forgot the roles were because we were just jumping on more tasks specifically rather than, oh, you do this and you're in charge of this and you're in charge of this. We also solved problems together instead of just handing it off like one piece after another to each other. So this meant actively telling each other what the updated version of the code was doing, or like what the current version of the website looks like and what troubles we're facing. And then we would volunteer to like jump on at whatever stage that they stopped at and then kind of transferred that over. So for example, when Maria was building out the HTML files, she gave us CSS control and checked in on our progress. But it wasn't just her like letting us do our thing and not being responsive at all. In fact, she volunteered many times to like help us out with the code, with the CSS and the styling whenever issues came up. When Alec was importing the FAQ CSS code, he kept us informed about the progress of that. And then we were able to troubleshoot it together when we realized like, oh, why isn't it loading? I think there's like a error in the code for some reason, even though the code is all correct. Like we copied it from, we got it from a specific source, but it's not loading for some reason. And so we went together and looked in the code and figured it out. When I was building the table of insurance lists, I relied on Maria's HTML and JavaScript setup to work. And it really helped having these stand-up meetings where we were able to quickly review the website, look at the features, and then examine the difficulties, and then constantly referring back to the user stories, because it was very easy to kind of get distracted about like a certain feature and why it wasn't working. And then we're trying to figure out alternatives, but then sometimes it's just not feasible to like get that feature to work. So we have to go back to the user story and think, okay, what did we want the user to benefit from on this website? What was the point of it? And if so, what are the alternatives that we can do for them to still be able to do that function, maybe not exactly with the exact feature that we had in mind. And these are regularly scheduled meetings. They'd be really relatively quick in terms of 30 minutes. And then we would have our Scrum board. We would have all these different user stories, but then with time constraints, we had to reprioritize these user stories into figuring out what was the most important one and what was the most feasible one that we could do with the given time constraints that we had. Because some user stories, it'd be really cool to try to address them, but it required a lot more work. For example, somebody with really specific health conditions and they wanted to have that input bar to put in their health issues and have that refine the insurance plan. That was a really cool concept, but then the difficulty points for that would be pretty high. So we decided to stick more with just somebody who didn't have health issue constraints and was just wanted to generate a map of some sort. And then we tracked the progress during these meetings. And then moving on to the user testing portion. So we decided to go with the CTA concurrent thinking aloud method, just because we found that it was most natural to the type of website that we had, just watching them actively do it in real time, going through the website and then speaking out their thoughts as it occurred without prompting them, because we also wanted to see what their natural thoughts were going to be, whether or not it was usable or not, whether or not the information that we listed on there made sense and if it was intuitive. And because of the simplicity of our website, kind of took around only 10 to 15 minutes testing with each user. We recorded their notes and comments on the features. So there are some quotes here on the right-hand side of the slide. And then we implemented changes for those. So initially our version of the website had black text on a black background, or gray text on a black background, which we realized was kind of hard to see. So a lot of users mentioned that the text was kind of hard to see and they couldn't really, because of that, they didn't know that they were supposed to click on the maps. So we changed the text into white for higher visibility. Also, an earlier version, the map was really large. It filled up the entire screen. And then so they wanted to make it smaller. And then so we adjusted the size for that to make it more proportional. They were confused about, I guess, why we had the insurance company listed to begin with, and also the small amount of insurance companies. And that was more of just us figuring out how to get the database going and then inputting more companies afterwards. We started off with a limited amount just to see if the table would work. It was about like 5 or 6 companies. And then we realized when we were doing user testing, they were confused about like, why is it these specific companies? Why only 5? Like, is there a special reason for that? And the reason was no, we just didn't finish inputting all the other companies out there. So after we fixed this issue by adding the rest of the companies, and they were the most popular insurance companies across America based on membership numbers. And so we got that information from another website and then put that on the table there. When they were on the FAQ section, initially it didn't have the specific sections, so it wasn't as organized, and they didn't like that they had to basically read through all the questions in order to find their own question, or the question that was like most closely related to what they're looking for. So we added different section headers like basic information, questions about location, questions about insurance companies. And then also somebody who actually was shopping around for insurance companies, they thought that the website could benefit from kind of like a insurance plan, like 101 for dummies kind of version in terms of the educational piece of the website. So they thought that when going to the FAQ section, they would see some basic definitions that would help them shop around, like what is a copay, what is a deductible, what is an HMO versus PPO. So just really basic information that explain some of the jargon behind insurance plans that would be really useful for them while they're shopping around, to have that knowledge in hand. So we decided to update the FAQ to not only have like more questions about what is this website for, what does it do, to also include insurance definitions. So just to make it more educational as well. And then finally in the contact form, it initially had other field data sets in there, for example, like your location and the type of inquiry. But it kind of looked weird and messed up the initial CodePen contact form that we had, even though we tried to modify and make it like appropriate when we when we added new field data sets. But then it still looked weird. And then we realized that they didn't really need a location in order to send us the inquiry to begin with. So we decided to take that out, and just to facilitate and make it easier for them to want to give us messages. They also were one person who had like a lot of experience contacting customer service, I guess, on different websites and I guess through different shopping experiences. They liked when the contact forms would say how long a representative would take to get back to them, because then that gave them some sort of I guess like accountability on the company to respond to them. So they liked having a time estimate of when a representative would get back to them. So we decided to just input a piece of text that says a representative will get back to you in 2 to 3 business days, just to show like, hey, okay, we'll actually respond to your message and get back to you. And it's not just going out there into the unknown and not getting a response. So those are some of the comments that we got back and decided to implement on. And that concludes our presentation.
All right, thanks so much. Great work. I'll ask the same question. What was maybe most frustrating through the development process? And were there any aha moments where something just clicked and things started working for you?
I think that the most challenging thing, it was our maps and the IPAs. We got to a point that the maps were only working on my computer, and like we didn't know why, because like it was working but only for me. And like, for example, like once we were able to set up all the IPA and like we can see a map on the screen, every time that you click a button of the estates, you will have a map, and if you click another one, it will show another map. So at the end of the test, you will have like 5 maps on the screen. So we had to figure out like how to filter it and like how to show this but hide this. And like also there was a point that like we were working on the maps and suddenly it probably was a problem on JavaScript, but you can see the maps, but suddenly the tables for Kevin like disappear, like completely disappear. So it was like a group team, like we really worked together to figure all this out. Yeah.
That's great. And were there any aha moments?
I can take that. So I think definitely going to your office hours helped, and getting the CSS code running to begin with. We realized that although we had like the right code in there, a lot of like just the references and the sourcing to link that code to the HTML was just wrong. And then so when I thought that like our code was just completely wrong, or like something like it was a major problem, but it turns out we just weren't linking the right like page to have it read the CSS code. And then once we finally saw it looking pretty in the way that it was supposed to look and wanted to look, that was like a good aha moment. It was like, okay, it's not that complicated. Just check the beginning script, like the beginning code. It may not be actually like the major code for the design. It might be something as simple as like, is the source coming through correctly?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we heard earlier too, right? It's that sometimes you can work for hours, think that something's screwed up, and then it's just one line, maybe a reference here or there that's wrong. And that's coding. But it really is, it's a funny thing if you work with developers. I think this is where you can maybe empathize with sometimes how they will respond to you. Maybe if you're on the other side and you've hired developers to do something, you might perceive that they're sandbagging maybe a little bit. They say that something's going to take longer than it really ends up taking. And a lot of that reason is they have to put in buffer in case something goes wrong, because so often, as a developer, you might take 1 week to get this one little stupid feature down. And then the next feature that you do may be twice as complex, twice as cool, and only take 1 day. That's just sort of the nature of coding. Sometimes you'll get stuck on a little snag that just doesn't quite work right. So that's another thing that I hope that everyone takes away from this is it's not just if you're developing yourself. That's not entirely what this class is for, although I hope we might spark some motivations to try to take a little bit of that path. But even if you don't, you can now talk to a developer, you can understand what they're going through on their side, and then that can help you become a better manager of developers down the road. So great work. Any other questions from the class for this project? All right, thanks so much. Good job. Okay, next up is IDAD.
So, hey everyone, we were the IDAD team. Just starting off, this is our landing page, and we tried to emphasize to fulfill our user story, like simplicity, straightforward directions, bold enough fonts that were easy to read, because our users, our target audience, are older people who may not be as tech savvy and may not be adept to navigating different types of websites or apps in our case. So we use different HTML elements like headers to help differentiate things between like our company name as well as like what kind of product we're promoting, which is our diagnostic service. And then we used a form element to collect the patient's name and date of birth so that we're able to track the different information that we get if we were to continue on with this MVP and use a server to help collect this information. We added an element within our HTML to make this required, so you can't move on further to the next page until you fill out this information. If you've at the bottom of our page, we have a contact us button, which leads to the same area, or a different area on the same page that we made using a different HTML feature to map it to a different section where patients can send feedback to us or any questions, because as a part of our user story, we really wanted our users to be active members, since this is a way for them to actively take part in their treatment plan and their diagnosis and managing this disease. So we wanted them to feel like they had a way to give us input and feedback to help make this experience more enjoyable for them. If I just fill out this information, then it'll take them to the instruction page, which again, we emphasize, very straightforward wording in readable fonts to give patients a accurate description of what they were going to be expecting as they moved on. It has similar HTML and CSS elements that you'll see both like previously in our landing page as well as in future pages. Our priority again is to give a clear, very, bare bones background. There's also a help button in the top right hand corner where if patients click on it, they're able to find a table of like helpful contacts. We populated this table with JavaScript and added a filtering function. So say they just know the last name of the person they want to contact. Oh, that was a bad example. Say they know the first name, then they can type it in and it'll navigate to the single best person who can help answer their questions. Or if they have a keyword, say they're just focusing on internet things, then they can just type internet and that person will pop up and it'll be easy for them to contact to get help. If we go back to the instruction page, it exemplifies that there are 3 games that they're going to play, and then they can click begin and they'll be prompted to move on to really the core of our MVP, which was 3 diagnostic games that fed into our user story of giving people a way to monitor their disease and then subsequently being able to take control of how their treatment plan is going to go.
And hi guys, so I'll start to talk about this time and space race game. And would you mind to pull up the JavaScript yeah, thank you. So basically what we did on this page is that we tried to make it on a single page for all the questions to hide and display by using JavaScript, so that we don't have an excessive amount of different pages, and also we only want one question at a time, because we can make it super large and easy to read and answer. So by doing that, I did it using a kind of probably not the most elegant algorithm, but so first of all, I make all of the IDs of the questions make their IDs to be Q1 to Q5. So first of all, I search for which of using a for loop. So which question is currently displaying. So when we find which question is being displayed, so we hide the current question and display the next one, and do the same thing for every time for a submit button, which is all the next button on this page was clicked. And also another thing is that I also create a welcome page, and so when the first time it's the next button was clicking, so there's no current question that was shown, so I will hide the welcome message and display the first question. So, and there are some other things we did in this JavaScript is that we disabled the default submit function is because when every time it submits, it kind of refreshes the page. So we have to disable that to prevent the page from reloading, and because we're using JavaScript, so the game will restart every time we click next. So and when we proceed to the last question, the submit button was linked to the next page, which is the next games, and that's it for this game. And I'll hand it off to Lynn to talk about our next games and HTML features.
So for this type of the name the animal, so we give like a question, for example, like to choose which are the lions in this type of question, and we have like 3 images for them to select. And or HTML, we use kind of like a form, and then use a division tag to put it into a section. So then later on, we can style it together with the CSS and manipulate it with the JavaScript. And since we wanted to do as kind of like a multiple choice thing, so we use the radial input type. Janet, if you could pull up the HTML. For this, yeah, so we was doing the input type as radial, and it will allow the user to make only one single selection from a list of options. And and since I want to create like a transition where you hover your cursor on the picture, and you can see that the cursor is turning to the pointer instead of like the normal mouse thing. So that's what I did in the CSS, where I set the cursor into a pointer and then do a mouse transition and the webkit transition, so that each image of the component will like kind of like delay a little bit when moving to another image. And you can see there's like a different lighting when you hover over the image, and that's also in the CSS where I'm trying to do like a great transition thing. So we have like 3 questions with the same type, and after you select it, then you click next to moving on to the next section. And we'll be ending up with another list of question where we will do the relationship question, where it will ask for grouping each object or like type of object into one category. And for this kind of question, I want to do I want the user to be able to select multiple options. So we were doing the input as a checkbox input, and it behaves like a toggle switch. So it's either can be checked and unchecked, and then by using the checkbox, we can have like select more than one option. And that's pretty much it for our question.
Yeah, so then after the patient completes these questions, they'll be headed to our ending page, which clearly emphasizes that nothing more is required from them, just to make sure that they're not feeling overwhelmed or that they've been sitting down for a period of time and they don't know when something's going to happen or when everything's going to end. And it provides them further information that it will be sent to their neurologist or to their provider, and they'll be in contact with more information. But if they wanted to also contact their provider before then, they could click the contact provider button and they'll be routed to a different part of the same page. We used, again, a form element to help collect all this information, and a drop-down menu aspect to help them select, what specific provider as well as what reason they want to be contacting them for. We provided this because, part of our user story was that we wanted it to be like a two-way interface between doctors and patients. So eventually, if we were to continue moving this MVP along, this would be able to sync up with one doctor's office. In our mind, these 3 doctors were operating out of the same doctor's office, so that's why it could go to one server and be accessible by all 3 different providers. And or if the patient wanted, more information about the games, they could just click more information, and then they could get this menu, which has links to the Alzheimer's Association and Medicare Enrollment Helpline, because maybe this is a new disease they were diagnosed with, or they're still unsure and they want more information. They could go to the Alzheimer's Association, as well as, since this is a diagnostic tool, some people may have questions on, how is it going to be billed to me? And is this a free tool? Is this something that's provided by my physician? So this Medicare Enrollment Helpline will help to specify, what's covered with their plans and what isn't. It also, through our HTML, we link this, so that'll open up to a different page in the screen versus just loading it on the same page, so that if they travel more on this website, they don't have to keep clicking the back button to navigate back to ID80. They can just click that to help simplify it even more. If we click the "what does my score mean," it'll be taking us to this algorithm that we use through Java, that we created through JavaScript to help people interpret their score. This can be used, we were anticipating, either after their neurologist contacts them with their official finalized score, or maybe they had an inkling on how many questions they got right as they were moving through the test, and they want to see preemptively what they could do. They could use this tool to calculate it. Let's say maybe they felt they got 8 questions right, but they've been having issues with their memory for the past 2 years. If we calculate the risk, it'll say, monitor. The total questions were 11 and it's 1 point per question. So this averages out to, it's not a big deal right now, but they should still monitor the disease. However, if maybe they say they only got 5 questions right and they've been experiencing memory issues for 2 years, then it's going to advise them to call their neurologist and get more information. As well as if they are currently taking medicine for memory issues like donepezil, it's also going to tell them to call their neurologist. And now Kevin will be talking more about how our roles were assigned and more about our user story.
Thanks, Jeanette. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Perfect. So just a quick run through of the team structure. We actually didn't start like the previous team. We're using Agile, and a lot of the teams actually moving to HTML and CSS. But Zuhao was our resident JavaScript expert, so we really thank him for that. But Jeanette also works a lot with the algorithms. So I am mostly on the project management for the QA, user testing, and creating kind of like a strategy and content for the time and space. But we are all pretty spread out. Everyone had a hand in a lot of things and input. So I think the team worked really well adjusting to feedback we got throughout each meeting over the course. But focusing on the user stories, going back to the original user stories, because the app is meant for elderly patients, right? And especially with possible cognitive impairment, we really want to focus this user stories to be for that target market. So we really want to have big, clear fonts, and it's simple to use, but also have a little bit more personalization so that they don't feel like it's very clinical and cold. And so that was the design philosophy going into this when we were making the websites. However, we realized that using the user testing, We gathered we tested it with 5 users, 4 students, and one is actually like an elderly patient who possibly has Alzheimer's. And we actually tested from a lot of different platforms. So from the computer screens on vertical, but also touch screens on the phones, because that's what my mom who prefers to use it on. So we actually tested on different platforms. The feedback we got was various. Remember, earlier we said that we want big clear fonts. Apparently that wasn't enough. So they wanted even bigger buttons and font sizes, reduced number of text. Earlier, when Jeanette was showcasing it, the date of birth was text. Before that, it was actually like some kind of calendar format. It was really cumbersome to actually use, especially for elderly patients. So we reverted back to just completely text. So that was the changes that we made, which is increasing font size, reduce the text, and changes the date of birth into the text box. But future changes we want to do is also rephrasing some text to be more personalized to the user, so they feel it's more friendly. The scoring system, as Jeanette mentioned, needs a little bit of tweaks because it's kind of confusing. And the logo needs to be a bit more high res, and smartphone usability. We did this, I think, will take a lot more work because of the centering, and so we want it so that users don't have to zoom in and everything. I think that's a lot of JavaScript. So these are future changes we want to do. Not sure if we'll make it by the Thursday for this week, but we'll at least be able to make a prototype that actually works for elderly patients. But that's the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for staying, and we'll take any questions right now.
All right, thanks so much. Great work. I'll ask the same question. Was there anything that was particularly frustrating throughout the development, and were there any aha moments where things just clicked?
I feel like CSS was a big, just getting everything to look nice on the screen was really challenging. And then moving on and then trying to look at it on my phone and seeing it all being messed up was just, it felt like I was in an endless loop, like a JavaScript loop that couldn't be broken. But I think after I made different classes and I finally figured out the formatting for the different classes, I could just apply it straight across the board for the different pages, and then it felt good at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in some ways, the frustration is actually the best teacher, because it's the first time is always hard, and then you don't really make the same mistakes, or it's sort of the best way to never forget a concept is to have to play around with it for a few hours, then it finally clicks. And I think, in your case, I think, asking questions such as, is mobile friendly very important with our population, I think can be valuable to ask, right? And I think there's a case to be made either way. But there's certainly a case to be made that maybe mobile, at least not small screen mobile, wouldn't be used by these patients anyway. And so maybe big screen, big font is the way to go. And I do like that there was a coherent theme around this. So it's sort of a website that you might not design for a contemporary, because maybe the big bold font is just not that sleek, but for your audience, it's actually perfect. And I think that was a great call to do that. I do have a question about the JavaScript. I thought that was really neat. The way that you calculated the how to go to the next question. I think sort of not using the repeats. I'm curious sort of what inspired that route, as opposed to just sort of hard coding or trying to just say, hey, if we reach this next question, make all the others disappear. Was it something that you found online somewhere, or just something that you decided to do sort of on your own?
Yeah, so actually I wrote that part. So for that, I because I have some experience with coding, but I do decide to want to do it like by myself on this, like specifically this algorithm, because I think this is a more like a very fundamental feature that can be accomplished by JavaScript. So I just would like to do it like in my own way, and then for the sake of the algorithm, I just don't want to, so that I don't want to repeat myself by just hard coding. And so a loop, or I first actually wrote a function and then call on the function, but then I that thing actually just take majority of my time to just to figure out. It's in the middle was a total mess, because it interfered with a lot of different stuff, as the one I was saying. I think I got the algorithm right when I was debugging it on the console and stuff. Actually the variables are working, and it's the assignments are working. It's displaying the right question, but every time I click next, it's refreshing, and I don't know what's happening, and that's kind of my most frustrating moment. And the moment I realized that it's just refreshing the page when it's submitting the form. It's like more like a HTML feature. That's when everything starts to solving. And I think what inspired this is just I just want to figure out how to do it, because this kind of algorithm, I can do it in anything, any element, if I just get the IDs working properly. So I think it's a good practice of what we learned from the Code Academy. So that's why I would like to do this, not like Googling online. And I think there will be more elegant and easier and better ways to do it online, but I just wanted to do it the hard way. So
I think it was a good method, because it also, like you said, it adds the flexibility. If you were to add 6 or 7 questions, it requires much less change to the code to do so. You change the number 5 to number 7 or whatever, and then it works. So great work. Any other questions from the class? All right, we'll move on to Botox Bubble.
Can you see this?
Yeah, we can. You just go into the slideshow mode.
Yeah, one sec.
Okay, so we are Botox Bubble. Next slide. So the team is composed of Kavya, who worked a lot on the HTML front and back end, CSS, JavaScript, and specifically on the homepage, the Learn More page, and the profile, which we're going to go into later on. Back one, thanks. I was taking more of a product manager role. So this initially was my wireframe design, so I kind of had the concept and tried to take that into production a bit more. I was responsible for the user testing and quality assurance, and kind of making that user message that we were trying to target there. And then Christian was in charge of the chat functions, and he did some videos as well. He was on the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then lastly, Giovanni was working on the map functions, and he also was working with HTML and JavaScript. So the initial idea or mission for this project was to burst the bubble, so to say, surrounding the stigma of getting these injectable treatments. So by providing these prospective clients with tools to find medical grade services and treatments, we hoped that they could unlock their innermost confidence and beauty. Next slide. So here we have our initial patient app view. So this was our mock-up design. So we tried to take some of these elements and put them into our final website, which we'll show you in a bit. But going into our user stories, first for a patient or potential client, they wanted to be able to look at types of treatments available in their area. They also wanted to be knowledgeable about the types of treatments available. So we really targeted those 2 user stories. And additionally, one user story that we wanted to target, at least start to target, was the ability to connect these patients to estheticians to do consult services. So we started that, but that was a really challenging element of our project that we hope to develop more in the future. So this is as I mentioned, the patient perspective. And later on, we're wanting to make a esthetician viewpoint as well. Next slide. So these are the 3 different kind of customer profiles that, you know, these injectable kind of services really are targeting. So there's sometimes, you know, a preventative patient who would be maybe around 18 or older, that's wanting to use these injectable treatments more for like what was referred to as baby Botox or preventative treatment. And then secondly, we have career professionals that are wanting to just reduce the look of, you know, some minimal fine lines and keep their really youthful appearance in the workplace. And lastly, we targeted mothers. So these are, you know, people in their maybe 40s or 50s, and they're really particularly Botox's largest customer. So next slide, we wanted to target each of these user groups for our user testing. So we were able to get some people that were on the younger side, 22 and 26, and also in the middle age to older, so 34 and 59. We were also able to test people across different regions. So I had a friend that was visiting me from the UK. She was one of our subjects, but we also got some people in California, the Midwest, and the East Coast. So it was good to get that wide range perspective. Next slide. So as I mentioned, those were the people we were interviewing, and we did a concurrent think aloud where I either worked with them in person or we set up a Zoom call, and they were able to, you know, go through the website and just speak aloud in current time about what they liked and what they disliked. So just some things that we, you know, noticed and were able to change throughout our development were, first, we wanted to simplify the sign in and create account features. So initially, these were separated and weren't really distinguishable, but we were able to use JavaScript to kind of consolidate that and make it more visually appealing and also more intuitive for the user. Second, we wanted to create a mission statement. Initially, you know, this wasn't really clear about, you know, what is this for? What's the goal of this project? So we wanted to clarify that in a consolidated mission, which I shared with you before. Third, we did some logo testing. So we looked at 3 or 4 different logos and decided on what they thought was best and most visually appealing. We also they wanted to have us include chat features. So also, instead of just having a chat on the website, we could also incorporate Facebook and WhatsApp platforms to make it more user-friendly and accessible on the digital format. Next, we wanted to have we had a top screen nav bar on the top left, as you know, a lot of websites do, but that was kind of confusing, especially in the mobile format. So we wanted to bring that front and center and make it very clear. And on the services near us page, we have only a few locations at the moment. So this was a bit confusing as to why we picked these specific locations. So in the future, we hope that we can expand our database and get more companies listed on there. And then lastly, some of the names on the Learn More page, which we'll show you in a minute, they were just names. So like Botox or Juvederm, but we wanted to add logos so that these you know, users could really associate, like, this is the product that matches this logo. Yeah, so next slide. Now we'll walk you through the actual website itself.
Thanks, Morgan. So can you still see this part of the screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So this is our kind of landing page. We wanted it to, while this is on like the desktop version, we also wanted this to fit and look good as well on the like mobile version as well. So this is our kind of logo in the top. So this is our Botox bubble logo. And then we have kind of like 4 different sub pages, as well as a little like chat feature here that Christian will talk about. So kind of the first page is just to learn more about injectables page. So this page just tells you kind of like our mission that Morgan went over, gives you like a very brief introduction into what injectables are, and as well as like the 3 kind of major types, so Botox, Dysport, and Juvederm, and then also just tells you how long results last. So we want people to kind of consult with the estheticians, but this is just like a brief introduction. And then clicking here takes you back to kind of the home page. So for the services in your area page, Giovanni did this, so
Yeah, so I can touch more about this. So So here, so initially our whole idea on this whole page was to sort of show certain services like around the area. So specific like facial bars or something like that. And so with that, for the top part, we decided to just focus onto. I guess ideally we could have added, relatively more, like 4 or 5, but we thought 2 would suffice. So with the whole like reveal button there, would reveal the D2 services that we wanted to focus on. And so there is just a brief description of it with specifically with one location, Newport Beach, and then gives a little bit about like a certain review that they have, and then their contact info and address and hours of operations. And then if you scroll down a little bit, please copy it. Yeah. So for 2, so there's one in Newport Beach, there's a second one in Manhattan. And so there you can sort of select which one out of the 2. So Newport Beach, New York. And then with that, it should give you the map with the marker there and sort of like play around with that. And so ideally that's for that page. And so there's obviously room for improvement and like ramp up maybe for like future collaborations to where a certain businesses can really like promote their location. So yeah, that's for that.
And then going kind of like back to the homepage, this is the chat feature. So Christian.
Can you put in the index first, please? Index page.
Next page?
Oh, in the index, yeah. Well, I was in charge of the coding in the chat. We can here show this option. We have, I make 4 options for the users to communicate with us. We have, I created first a Facebook page to get a code from my HTML code, and second, create a WhatsApp. And this is I made a plugin called WhatsApp. Maybe we can try in the messenger, please. First, yes, you can do click, and then it appear our Facebook page, and we can make the comment directly. This pop-up message appear in all pages while it is charging, and maybe we can click. And the other option is maybe some user doesn't want to share the personal information, or doesn't want to send the WhatsApp message to, maybe they can share their personal telephone number. We have another option. Maybe we can click in with chat with us, please. Thank you so much. We have another option that is that Facebook comment app API plugin that we installed, but it is in Spanish because my Facebook was, my mobile phone is in Spanish. We will change it. And also, well, in this option, we need to sign up in Facebook. But if the user doesn't want or doesn't have the Facebook app, you have the other option, the custom chat that is in the left side. Maybe you can write it in the box of submit, please. Yes, and put submit. Yes, and it appeared there. We have we covered the 4 options to get in contact with the user. Thank you.
Thank you. And then kind of like the last page is just kind of like a profile login page. So if you go to this page, this is kind of more for future directions when like both kind of the potential client as well as the esthetician can log in, and that way they can communicate through there. But this is just kind of your basic username or password. And then if you don't have an account, you can also go ahead and kind of create an account, or otherwise you can already just sign in with an existing account. This part. Can you still see the slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that is what I have explained. It was made in JavaScript, all the features of the chat. Think.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Christian. Yeah, so I just talk a little bit more on the whole like quality side. And so here it's initially what we had for our homepage. And so I guess like one of the first difficulties that we had faced was I guess like changing like the colors, particularly for the buttons. And so like initially they were solid blue. And so for some reason like our entire page was just had a background of like the solid blue color. And so obviously, you know, to change that to have, you know, I guess more of a white background, we sort of had a difficulty with that. And so basically just after reviewing our code and like really cleaning it up, we're able to change, you know, the button color to what is now the pink color. And so another issue that we had also was the centering of the homepage. And so with that, again, just like reviewing the code with like really assigning like the correct class to like the correct elements and just, you know, referencing everything together really gave us like that clean outlook and allowed us to smooth everything out. And so therefore, like it allowed us to have the whole Botox bubble logo in the middle and then also centered everything. So that completed for that one. Yeah, and so for the following one, sort of like a similar issue, but then just more on the profile page. And so initially, as you can see on the left, it was pretty basic, like with the HTML and like CSS and the CSS templates. And so initially with that, we just had, you know, simple buttons. And so essentially after we integrated the sign up aspect to it, our logo just magically appeared behind the sign in buttons for some odd reason. And so again, just after integrating JavaScript and really reviewing everything, like, you know, pinpointing like each of our code and reviewing everything, we successfully were able to sort of move that Botox bubble logo, you know, to the top left and sort of integrate like our dynamic profile login page there. And so we felt that those two things were pretty successful. And so now for now, essentially that we talked about the whole web page, now we want to just sort of like suggest where we feel we can go with this. And so we've really focused like on our customer user story. And so I guess our next objective would be to really maybe have a more of a deeper focus like with the esthetician. And so maybe perhaps specifically with our chat function, if we would be able to like allow and like facilitate like that patient and esthetician communication, we feel would be good for our web page, as initially like we just have a simple chat box function. It's more internal. And so also for our services page with the whole map outline, we can also update our that specific page by just perhaps like with potential and future collaborators, they can really like integrate their own business as sort of like a promotion and sort of really like outline and lay out the whole website towards that. And then finally, I guess an important function that is just quite difficult, I guess with our own experience levels, is really trying to integrate like a camera upload function to add that real-time consultation for our website. And then apart from that, just really just try to revamp like the whole site maybe and sort of integrate like a more aesthetic manner, all while like trying to maintain our quality insurance and sort of like debugging our platform. And so basically that's the future directions, and that concludes our presentation.
Great, thanks so much. Great job. I really like the design of the site and the incorporation of some of the class concepts. I'll ask the same question. What was most frustrating about the development process, and were there any aha moments where you felt like things really started clicking?
I think like initially some of the CSS, like some other teams said, was a little frustrating, but then I think eventually that did like click with the help of like office hours and just working on it. And I think one of the like aha moments was just like kind of how you mentioned that the order of your JavaScript matters in the HTML kind of header. but I didn't realize that the CSS one also matters, whether it's like before or after, how that impacts it. So I guess that was something that once I changed that, I was able to overwrite the Bootstrap code. So that was important to customizing the page.
Yeah, that's great.
And then even going back a little bit from that, like none of the team really had, I don't think any of us had any coding experience. So that was a challenge, just kind of getting past that initial barrier and getting our grounds. Yeah, I think we did a decent job overcoming those challenges, especially working with you in your office hours. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I remember when you all said that you didn't have any coding experience at the beginning, and I think it's pretty impressive what a bunch of people who didn't know how to code were able to build. And I think that goes for the rest of the class as well. I think it's a pretty ambitious goal to try to have teams create actual websites within the course of half of a semester, especially people who, for the most part, don't know how to code at all. And so really my number one goal was to empower you to really see yourselves as creators, as web page creators, as coders. It's not just knowing how to do the basic coding principles. It's really about knowing that you can create something. And, in a sense, what you've created is probably not that much different from what Mark Zuckerberg created in the dorm room, right? With Facebook. It's, of course, you can't create Facebook today very easily. That takes thousands of people and a lot of money. But that MVP is probably not that far off from what you all were able to create today, or at least through this class. And so, I really want you all to see yourselves as people who can create these sort of things. And next time you have the idea of, hey, there should be an app for this, or there should be a website for this, know that you can probably do that. And in fact, from what I've seen today, you absolutely can do that. And so I want you to feel empowered to do so. And I think you all did a great job. I'm always amazed at what everyone's able to complete by the end of the class. And I think there were some very impressive projects that we all saw today. Any other questions or comments from the class? Things that you either really liked or didn't like so much? All right, so why don't we take a 10-minute break? We'll come back at 4:53. I'll go through backend code a little bit, and then I've got a little survey that I'd like you all to fill out. It's a little bit different from the course evaluation feedback, and it will be anonymous, though. You don't have to worry about me seeing who submitted what. So 4:53, we'll come back and close out the class. Okay, so to close things out, I do want to talk a little bit about server-side code, also known as backend code, because this is really what closes everything or pulls everything together, right? So you learn how to do a lot of front end. You learn how to use JavaScript as sort of a fake front end language. But backend is really how you add power to the website. This is how Facebook is able to store millions and millions of profiles, and then do stuff with it, use machine learning to create targeted ads, things like that. So there's three main homes or concepts that we talk about with regard to backend coding. There's the browser itself, and now everything that you did coding wise was on the browser. So even the JavaScript code is actually executed by the user's browser itself. When we start to talk about backend code, we start to talk about server code. So that means that the information that the users submit to your web page ends up going to a server that's hosted by you. And that server will then either do stuff with the data, use algorithms, etc., and then spit the outputs of all of that work back into the browser-facing code, which would be HTML, JavaScript, or CSS. And then finally, there's the database. So the database is essentially where you're storing everything. And the database It's usually something called SQL, which is really a relational database. I don't know if anyone's ever used Microsoft Access, but that's essentially the less used sibling of Microsoft Excel, but it's far more powerful, actually. I think it's just the learning curve has maybe prevented its adoption. And what you have with a relational database is you have several different databases that are all linked together. And if you do that with Excel, there's a lot of weird crosstalk. It's hard to actually keep everything together. But these SQL databases, you can essentially have one database that is all the users of a platform, another database that might be everyone's scores. Let's say if we're talking about ID, AD, maybe it's their esthetician preferences, if we're talking about Botox bubble, so on and so forth. And that's an entirely separate database, but it links to each user. And that can be a very powerful tool. And in fact, there's a lot of companies still to be created that are essentially just replacing what are currently Excel functions or Google Sheet functions within companies with SQL functions that can be hosted by a web page. And these are companies or products that you could sell to an enterprise for thousands of dollars a pop, thousands of dollars even a week, because you can save them so much time. So just a bit of a sneak preview as to the amount of money you could make simply by transferring someone's work that is being done on spreadsheets into a web page hosted on an SQL database. We've really just hit the tip of the iceberg in terms of business use cases that have been addressed by web pages such as this. Any questions about that? Okay. Backend framework. So typically what you'll have within and I'm going to use Python as an example, within a backend code is you start with something called urls.py. And this is essentially your switchboard. So if I were to go to any web page, let's just use Facebook as an example. And it's the same with Instagram if you're doing it online, as opposed to within the app, is you have an address. So it might be facebook.com/u for user / some long number. Now that might, if Facebook were run on Python, be fed into this urls.py switchboard. And then URLs would then say, okay, so because it's facebook.com/user, you want to bring up a user profile. And now because after the user, it's /1,856,532, then that must mean that you want the user with that ID. And so that's how it will know in the next side of the code how to bring up that specific profile. So once you get to a certain URL, that information gets fed into the views.py. And the views.py is kind of the workhorse of your code. So for those of you who, if you remember the diabetes algorithm, that's something that would normally be inserted into the views.py. That is the most classic back-end code. It is essentially some sort of algorithm that will transform inputs, maybe from the urls.py, combined with who the user is, maybe who their connections are, what their disease history is, so on and so forth, and then do stuff with that through an algorithm that has been written into views.py, and then spit that out into a template. And then the template is essentially HTML, but with little brackets for where they would like the views to insert variable data. And then that goes back to user facing. So the backend template is the same thing as the HTML templates that you've created, except that it can contain variables. So it doesn't all have to be hard coded. And you saw in the last lecture, and some of you implemented a way to use JavaScript arrays to fill in those variables. And with backend code, and in this case, Python, It's just a little bit of a more elegant way to do that without using JavaScript. The last element is models.py. And models.py is essentially your blueprint of the database info. So what this kind of looks like it's like a framework for how, if we were using an Excel sheet, how that should look. So in your models.py, you would define all the columns, which are also attributes of a given database. And then each element that you would then save to the models is kind of like a new row. So let's say you have your user model. That might have different attributes like user's name, user's email, user's row. And then as someone might create a new user, let's say through the urls.py, maybe the sign up page, then the views might take what they submitted in the form and then save a new object to the models.py database. And then that could then be queried later on and used to fill in, someone's profile information. Maybe if they have friends now, that would then be added to a given user's friends list, so on and so forth. Okay, so here's a simplified example, just a visual example of what we just went over. So HTML, this might be the part that you're most familiar with. But instead of saying in this header, just writing the name like William Rosh, and then an image, which might be a link to a photo of me, instead what you would do is you would use your views code within your profile.html. So it'll reference that HTML template. And then within this, you're basically creating a function. And then that function will ask for the profile's name and the profile picture, as well as maybe querying whatever friends you have. So don't worry too much about the syntax. It's more the principles that I'd like to get you all ingrained into in case you want to explore this later. But so the principles are that within this views code, you could, let's say, query all of the users that are friends with the request user. And the request user is basically just whoever's requesting the page. So if you're logged in and you request the profile.html page to go up, then you are the request user. And so if it's looking for all the people who are friends with you, then it might query that from the user database right here, and then put all of this information into the HTML. So that's essentially how that link up works. Just some nitty gritty. We won't go too much into detail on this, but I wanted to provide this to you all as kind of like a compendium of links that can be helpful. So the first thing is you're going to really have to get good with using your command consoles. Now you can do it through Visual Studio Code. You could also use it through the Windows command prompt or the Mac terminal. So I've created links on how-tos for each of these. If you want to use Python, which is the one that I'm most familiar with and is really one of the more commonplace languages out there, use this link to install it onto your computer. And then use a pip package manager to install the following. So I have this link here that basically helps you create an environment for installing any packages related to the backend code. I would recommend Django as your backend framework. And so this link will show you how to install that. And as far as SQL database goes, I would recommend PostgreSQL. And these are sort of the latest and greatest. They're not the most avant-garde languages to use, but they're certainly at this point the most popular. And right now, I think as you're trying to learn, it's good to start with the most popular because that's where there's the most activity within, say, Stack Overflow or the user forums, where you can get help, as well as far as job prospects go, that's what people are going to be looking for right now. So these are the links that I would recommend you follow if you want to start to learn how to use and integrate backend code with your projects. Step 4 is download a text editor, which I think you all have already done at this point, and then follow this link on how to start a Django project. And this will essentially get you to the point where you have the most basic of web pages that sort of has a functional models.py, has a functional urls.py, as well as a functional views.py. After you've created that, and these instructions will show you what to do, but you're going to create a slightly different method for displaying your page on your browser. So this is a key thing. You all have gotten used to sort of copying the index.html and then posting that onto, or pasting that into your browser. If you're using backend code, you have to do it slightly differently. What you have to do is actually spin up a server on your computer. And so these instructions will show you how to do that. And then once you do that, within your command prompt, you could just write this Python manage.py run server, and then it's going to actually create that server on your computer. And then you can use the following link to navigate through your page. Okay, I would also encourage you to listen or learn a little bit more on Python. If you don't want to pay for Codecademy, you can still learn Python 2 for free. If you want to learn Python 3, they actually have a little bit of a paywall behind that. I will say that learning Python 2, it'll get you to understand what you need to learn. There's just a few minor but also prevalent things that you'll have to change up as you start to implement Python 3. It's funny, actually the most basic one is learning how to print, which is the same as in JavaScript, your console.log function. So it's actually not even really a very functional tool that has been changed up between 2 and 3, but it's one that if you get used to printing with the Python 2 method, it might throw you off as you switch over to Python 3, which everyone should do. There's no point starting your coding on Python 2. You really should start with Python 3 because that's what everyone else is using now. Here's a link for getting started with Django. And then last, I do want to talk about a couple concepts that are very important within health IT. So the first is HIPAA. I'm sure you all have heard about HIPAA. Maybe you had it in your classes. Maybe you heard about it with regard to COVID, because it's certainly something that people talk about when we talk about symptom screening and showing your vaccine passport and all of that. HIPAA stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It was passed in the mid-90s. And essentially what it did is it created what are called covered entities. And covered entities are really the people who are subject to HIPAA. And these include healthcare providers that are engaged in electronic transactions. They have access to health plans, as well as these healthcare clearinghouses that just have a lot of your health data. And specifically, when we talk about health data, we're talking about PHI, which is protected health information. And that's defined as really any info that can identify a past, present, or future health condition and can be tied to an identifiable individual. And the reason that I bolded identifiable is it's actually, even if you have the most personal of PHIs possible, maybe someone, had cancer and then had an operation that is now made it so that they can no longer have kids, right? So very personal information that in most cases is considered PHI, but if you're able to de-identify it or really disaggregate that information from the actual people, so you just turn all the people into John Does, Jane Does, who don't have any identifiable address, phone, anything, then that can actually lose the label of PHI. And that can be very powerful when we talk about machine learning. Maybe we want to analyze the health data of the entire population of a certain region. Then what we can do is we can de-identify that data so that we can do lots of stuff. We can work with that data without having to worry about the regulations of HIPAA. But if you can't do that, or you don't want to do that based on the function of your particular application, then you do fall under the regulations of HIPAA. And HIPAA it's not really a certification or anything. All it is a guidance of certain security practices that you have to put in place in order to house this data. And we'll talk about those in one of the last slides. There was an update to HIPAA in 2009 called High Tech, and this is the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health. And the main takeaway from the High Tech Act is that it created something called business associates, which are not just the covered entities themselves, which would be the health plans, the hospital systems, and the data clearinghouses within healthcare, but also the third-party providers that access that information. So this was something that was really needed. If you could imagine, in the mid-90s, when the only thing people were doing on the internet was AOL.com, it might not have been as necessary. But in 2009, all of a sudden, we're seeing a lot of these cloud providers, all sorts of third-party providers that were working with electronic health records and all of that. And there was a need to put them within the scope of HIPAA. And so anyone that can access this PHI, as well as create, maintain, or transmit PHI, is now known as a business associate. And they have to sign a business associate agreement, which really just ties them directly to that covered entity and requires them to permit or to prevent the disclosure of any of that PHI, as well as implement extra security controls to make sure that they're keeping that information safe. Some of the major technical requirements within security that if you are to have an application that you develop within healthcare, that you'll need are one, access control. So this is not only having a password, it is also having a strong password. So you can't just write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or write your name as your password, but it has to meet certain requirements. I believe the current state of the art has to be 8 characters, has to have letters, numbers, as well as symbols for it to be a quote unquote good password. Not only do you need a good password, but you also should have levels of permission. So not every user has the same access. Instead, maybe you have patients who have a certain level of access. You have providers who have a different level of access and maybe can't access all patients, can only access their patients. Then on top of that, maybe you have administrators who have another level of access that maybe they can't do things that providers can do, but they could do other things that providers can't do. So it's setting these permission principles. And usually what people like to say is the least privilege principle, which is what are the least amount of privileges that you could give to a user where they could still do their job. And then finally, around access control, I'm sure you all have heard now of multi-factor authentication. That is quickly becoming the state-of-the-art requirement within any sort of health application and even really beyond. So requiring multi-factor authentication for anybody to log in the first place, so that if their password is somehow compromised, you still can't access their data because you would now need their phone maybe, or their email address, wherever that multi-factor code is being sent. Audit control, also very important. So that includes having logs, having a way to detect when unusual activity is happening on an application. That, there was a breach of one of the actually main security providers. I think it was mid last year. And then they found out that they had been breached for, I think, over a year before they were caught. So it was just like a very subtle piece of code that got integrated into their system. And whoever was doing the hacking had access for a very long time. And one way to prevent that from happening would be to continually audit the platform and make sure that there's no unusual activity. Everything is going according to plan. And then sort of related to that is integrity, where you can confirm that the data that you have has not in any way been altered. Or if it has been altered, you have a logging trail so that you can see, okay, this data was altered. It was modified back in April by this user, and this is what they changed. And then in May, there was another alteration. And this is, you got a little bit of an introduction to this as you all were using GitHub, because GitHub has version control. You can see all the incremental changes that were made to your code. And that helps you understand where something might have gone wrong, who did it, and how to revert it back to its previous state if you ever need to do that. Again, restricting access is very important. So don't have it to where everybody has access to everything as long as they're logged in. Try to have restricted access where applicable. And then transmission security. So this is the one that's sort of the most in the weeds. But you might have noticed that there used to be websites that would be http:// and then www.whatever.com. Those HTTPs don't really exist anymore. They do, but they're much, much more rare now. Now what you'll see is HTTPS. And that S actually means a lot. It means that the data is being protected as you're going from page to page within that site. And nowadays, a lot of browsers will actually warn you if you're about to enter into a site that does not have that S on it. And there's a lot of work that goes into getting that status as an HTTPS. The good thing about that, though, is that you don't really have to do that much. It's sort of something that you can just switch on within a lot of the providers that you'll use for your domain control. So if you were to buy a domain, let's say kgi.com, then whatever service is managing that domain can make sure that you're doing the transmission security properly. A lot of security is just knowing what to turn on and what not to turn on. Very few people do security coding themselves. Usually what they do is they just know which applications to add on within their website to make sure that they're using the proper securities. It's the people who don't know what to turn on and what to turn off that get into trouble. Okay, one last thing about this that I'd like to emphasize is that hackers, they don't generally go after the most secure websites unless it's really juicy, right? If I'm like American Express and I have all these credit card information, all that, then of course I'm going to be very highly secured, but I'm going to have a target on my back, right? But usually what people do is hackers will just sort of cast a wide net. So they'll know about a certain vulnerability. Let's say people don't all turn on their firewalls, or people don't encrypt their data. So they don't do the HTTPS. Instead, it's just HTTP. And they just look for the websites that are doing it wrong. And those are typically the ones that they'll go after. And you'd be surprised at what some of those websites are. They're sometimes websites that you're very familiar with, and they just don't have any security team that is worrying about this sort of thing. Encryption, this is another thing that sort of sounds very scary, but again, it's just something that you can turn on. So this is Amazon Web Services. They have a key management service. So all you have to do is sort of read the documentation, turn it on, and then they do it for you. So Amazon is a provider. Google does this. Microsoft does this. And there's a lot of smaller companies that are doing it as well. Okay, and then finally, FDA regulation. So this is actually an area where things have gotten a lot easier for you. So we talked a little bit about how things have gotten harder in terms of security and all of that in HIPAA. But one thing that was actually passed within the 21st Century Cures Act not too long ago was that digital tools such as just clinical decision support software, or mobile apps are not subject to FDA oversight. So before this was passed, there was a worry that maybe all digital health tools need to be regulated by the FDA as a medical device. But then they came out with guidance that said, you know what, all we really care about is hardware, as well as software that actually manipulates health data. So if that software is providing a definitive diagnosis, or maybe it's controlling an infusion pump, something like that, we still need to regulate it. But if it's anything else, the FDA is saying that they don't need to regulate that. And what that does is that frees up the development of digital health apps. And the fact that this is so recent means that there's still a lot of untapped opportunity within this space if you want to go into digital health as a career. So this is really one of those areas where you can be the change maker, and it's not even that hard. There's so much opportunity out there that is being untapped. I think there's a lot more opportunity than there is talent going after that opportunity. So this is really a area that is rich for innovation, and something that you all could easily become the next generation of innovators within. So what's next? Just a few concepts. Telemedicine is a big one. COVID really opened the floodgates with that. The usage of blockchain for patient records. So patient records is historically a very siloed concept. So if I have patient records within City of Hope, and I end up going to the emergency room at Kaiser, they don't have my information. And they say that the main reason is because they need to keep it secure. So this is actually the best application for blockchain that I've heard. I'm more of a blockchain skeptic than most people, sort of my contemporaries, but I think patient records is a very important area in which blockchain could be of use. Artificial intelligence. So there's now more data than we know what to do with because of the implementation of electronic health records. So using artificial intelligence, machine learning to parse that data and help make clinical decisions that can benefit populations is a big opportunity. And then real world evidence is sort of an offshoot from that. So can we move beyond clinical trials and actually use evidence in the real world to determine what treatments we need to be using on what people? That's a huge opportunity if we can take advantage of it. And then of course, digital therapies themselves. So we went over a couple at the beginning of this course, but you could imagine maybe a game or some sort of app that could help improve your mental health, that could help you with an addiction, or could just help with something like medication adherence. So there's a lot of opportunity within digital therapeutics as well. So we don't just all have to take a pill for whatever ails us. So that's it. I did paste a link in the chat for course feedback. I'd love for you all to fill it out. It's completely anonymous, not required. But if you got anything to tell me, any ways that I could improve the class, I would love to hear from you. And you're all free to go. I really enjoyed working with you all. I'm really impressed by what you came up with. One last thing I'd like to say is that you do have time to make little bits of change, improvements, fixing bugs to your code. And just if you make any major change, make sure that you let me know, because I'm primarily going off the presentations, but I will be looking at the web pages themselves as well as anything within the your Google Drive folders. So just help me out a little bit if you made any changes from today. But that's it. I'll stick around if anyone has any questions. Happy to answer them. Thanks so much.
Thank you.